Welcome back to Amani on Air from apparently a new America that is now fully under Sharia law. Sharia law has spread throughout these lands. New York City has fallen. It is now a caliphate. And apparently, there is a new world order that is now coming into fruition, a war of the worlds. Or at least that's what mainstream media would have you believe, based on all of the headlines, all of the reactions to us electing the first Muslim mayor in New York City history, Zohran Mamdani. Last week, I was invited to my longtime friend Ramy Youssef's show in New York, where it was just, an intimate gathering of friends, family, admirers, where he was testing out new jokes on us, throwing that new material our way, to a sold-out show at an iconic venue in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. And out of the entire evening, probably the skit that got the most laughs out of the audience had to be Ramy's impersonation of Zohran Mamdani. Ramy has got this man's $1 million trademark smile down to a T. And it was absolutely hilarious watching him bring his version of Zohran to life. When I caught up with Ramy backstage after the show, I actually asked him, does Zohran know about this? Did he hear these jokes? And Ramy told me, no, he hasn't, but he will. And at that time, I took that to mean yeah, of course he will, right? These jokes will get back to him, or I'm sure Ramy eventually is gonna test them out on him. But no, Zohran did in fact hear those jokes when Ramy turned them into a full-on skit for Saturday Night Live.
Is for the person serving me that bagel to be paid a living wage.
I'm telling you, man, the post 9/11 kids are up. Ramy Youssef on SNL was hilarious, but it was also prophetic. It is wild watching Muslims get turned into pop culture content while we are still being used as political punching bags in real life. Cut to history being made in New York City. Now, if we're going to be honest, if we're going to be real about this entire thing, we all know that Zohran's race wasn't just about getting Zohran elected. This was probably the biggest modern day test of who gets to lead in America and who is still considered the outsider. I guess the more direct question is, are American Muslims allowed to lead? It is not news to any of us the way that Zohran's race has been completely hijacked by the establishment and by mainstream media because of his Muslim identity. The entire mayoral election was very much this us versus them, the Americans versus the jihadis kind of mentality. Very George Bush, very Y2K, very throwback era, okay? Like this person said on social media, low-rise jeans are back, cute bag charms are back, and Bush-era racism is very much back. Zohran's campaign pretty much just resuscitated the post 9/11 Islamophobia and breathed a whole new breath of life into it. Just the fact that Zohran, the first Muslim candidate for New York City mayor, was compelled to have to address over and over again whether or not he supports global jihad. His candidacy somehow inspired all of his enemies to invoke 9/11, which brings me back to my original question, which is, what does an Indian Muslim with a Ugandan citizenship have anything to do with 9/11, except for manufacturing some type of 9/11 connection to scare people, to manufacture fear, and tell people to not elect this man solely because of the fact that he's Muslim? I mean, throwback to one of just the gems of this race, which was the moment that Eric Adams decided to endorse Andrew Cuomo.
New York can't be Europe, folks. I don't know what is wrong with people. You see what's playing out in other countries because of Islamic extremism, not Muslims.
And of course, like attracts like, because after Eric Adams' endorsement, Cuomo also finally got the endorsement of none other than Donald J. Trump himself. Donald Trump endorsed Cuomo, and shortly after that, so did Elon Musk. Like they say, judge me by my enemies. Because if the billionaires are telling you not to vote for this guy, that's probably the biggest indicator that you should absolutely vote for that guy. Not only that, but when the most high profile political criminals in our country have to join forces like the goddamn Avengers to try to push back against the influence, the impact, the momentum of this one individual, of Zohran Mamdani, I think that was everyone's biggest giveaway of like what truly good versus evil looks like in this situation. But like, just rewind for a sec, okay? That statement that Eric Adams made when he endorsed Cuomo, I think sums up the entire political strategy that was flung at Zohran from the very beginning when the establishment started sensing that his movement was a threat. That was when Eric Adams said that New York can't become like Europe with all of their Islamic extremism. The fact that he's even bringing up Islamic extremism when speaking of a Muslim candidate is just so shockingly villainous. That's a true villain move, you know? You know exactly what you're doing when you make that type of connection happen. Unfortunately, the general American public is very ignorant when it comes to Muslims, when it comes to Islam. And with good reason, because they are fed a very specific narrative on the news, through mainstream media, online even, through social media censorship, like what Elon Musk is doing to manipulate the algorithm, to make it very anti-minority groups, to stoke nationalistic sentiments. Like, if you were going off of Elon Musk's X, you would think that the white race is at risk of extinction and, you know, the entire world is going to come crumbling down because of these migrants and just really, really disgusting stuff. So when politicians like Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo try to ride the coattails of those types of stereotypes and biases in order to manipulate the public, they're pretty much saying that they think Americans are stupid. Politicians talk to us like we're dumb and like we'll blindly eat up everything that they serve us. That's been the biggest problem for the political status quo with social media. Why do you think they wanted to ban TikTok so badly? Because TikTok was the only social media platform not owned by the US where they could completely control the algorithm and what kind of information reaches people. They do not want Americans to be well educated, because if they were well educated, then they would vote better. And if they vote better, then these politicians are out of a job. So what do they do instead? They stoke division. It's quite obvious that Zohran is a major threat to the establishment because of the fact, sheerly, that they've been working so hard to try to stop him. And it just goes to show that this is about preserving establishment power, not actually about Republicans versus Democrats, or not really a care for what's best for the country. Because if that's what this was actually about, then the Democratic Party would be running after Zohran. They would be eager to embrace Zohran and uplift him and even learn from him and apply some of the lessons that he's gained from his race to other politicians, other races that are really crucial across the country in order to preserve our rights. But that's not what's happening. In fact, it's become abundantly clear that the only pushback that Zohran's opponents have had to use against him has been his Muslim identity. Probably the most viral political cartoon of Zohran's race was this one, where Zohran is literally depicted as a communist plane being driven into a tower labeled New York. Our political elites, rather than embracing change and progress, have decided that they would rather burn the whole house down and resuscitate this decades-old flavor of hate and fall back on probably the most vile and toxic strain of American racism that we have had in recent history. Again, Y2K is so back. And on top of all of this, the insistence on mispronouncing Zohran's last name. Mamdani is not hard to pronounce. all of this intentional, orchestrated mispronunciation of his last name, obviously it is for a political means because they want to try to fragment that name recognition that Zohran has earned so rapidly over the past year, going from a no-name assemblyman to now truly one of the most famous Muslims on the planet, and certainly one of the biggest political threats in the United States of America. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the name Mamdani probably keeps them awake at night. Like, they probably wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night thinking about how this brown man that they underestimated from Astoria somehow snuck up on them by doing something shocking, which is speak to and unite underrepresented communities that deserve to be heard. And oh my God, wow, organizing actually works. But on top of that, still mispronouncing Zohran's name is nothing but petty racism. But also, all it does is really make you look dumb. Because how are you telling me that you don't know how to pronounce a basic sequence of English consonants?
The name is Mamdani. M-A-M-D-A-N-I. You should learn how to say it.
And then in Elon Musk's tweet, which we all were waiting for with bated breath, he calls him Mamdummy, or whatever his name is. To which I replied, whoever the billionaires want you to vote for, it's probably in your best interest to vote the opposite. Duh. Common sense tip. And then don't even get me started. Like, Michael Rappaport, he's above mispronouncing Zohran's name. He's over there trying to concoct weird, like children's playground level nicknames for Zohran, okay? Obviously, as a brown person with also a unique name, it's just such bullshit, okay? Like, we are not in elementary school anymore. I can't even say we're not in high school anymore because this was like elementary school level type of nonsense. It's so funny because these men like Cuomo, Musk, Trump, they have so much cash in the bank, like more than can be spent in one lifetime, and yet they still act like immature, insolent little children. I guess that's some good news for all the men out there. Money truly does not buy riz at all. I'm sure by now you guys have seen my interview with Zohran Mamdani in the last episode, which was the premiere of season 2 of Amani on Air. So glad to be back. That interview was so much fun. It was so chaotic and high energy. But what struck me the most when speaking with him was just how much conviction he had in his voice and what he says. You know, when you've been around politicians long enough, you totally can see and almost expect when the wheels are turning. You know, when like they're filtering everywhere that comes out of their mouth, or they're going back to specific talking points that they were fed to say. But you don't see that when you talk to Zohran. That is my favorite part of speaking with him, especially when it's an interview, especially when I'm talking to him about the issues, is he always sounds the same. He never switches up. He's not the type of person to code switch on you depending on who he's talking to. And he has no fear of what he's saying being taken out of context or twisted. He knows exactly what his message is. And that is something very refreshing and very beautiful for us to see. And for me, I was very, very delighted to see that, especially because that interview was barely 2 weeks out from the election, and to see us come so far, so deep into the race, you know, so many communities spoken to, so many promises made, the fact that he still sounded exactly the same, no hesitation, didn't mince his words, that made me feel really happy and really reassured that if Zohran hasn't caved to the pressure at this point, then this man truly, you know, he's good for the road ahead, inshallah. Here's the thing that you all should know about Zohran. Even though the world may have woken up to him over the past year, the country may have just woken up to him, Zohran is known in New York City, especially amongst grassroots organizers, especially among activists. Zohran has built a name for himself. Not in terms of flashy reputation or clout, because truly, this level of celebrity, he's only acquired that in recent months. But prior to that, he's been known for his actions. He's been known for being present, for showing up for different communities, for being at the center of the work that needs to be done. And I can say this because that's how I met Zohran. I've known Zohran for a few years now, and actually the first time that we met in person was for a protest action. Zohran reached out to me in November 2023, a mere few weeks after everything popped off in Gaza on October 7th, 2023. Zohran was the first public official to reach out to me. Just weeks after everything had started, he had an immediate plan to launch a hunger strike at the White House. So he asked myself, Cynthia Nixon, a few other activists and organizers from the tri-state area to come join him, go down to the White House, and launch a hunger strike in protest of Israel's military actions, the collective punishment of the civilians of Gaza. He's always been a super, super sweet guy, but the thing that truly stood out to me the most and was the biggest reason why when he decided to run for mayor, without question, I threw my support behind him, was this. We launched a hunger strike. There was a lot of media and press there that met us in front of the White House. And you know how these things go, right? When you first launch an action like that, when there's like a press conference, there's so much news around. There are the cameras, the lights, and everything. And that's really when an action gets the most attention, right? It's like at the very beginning. That's when the eyeballs are on it. There was one point where the rest of us had already ended our hunger strikes, and Zohran was the last one standing. For days after we had ended our hunger strike, when the cameras were gone, everyone had gone home, the lights were off, Zohran, just of his own conviction, carried on this hunger strike like he said he would. And just the fact that he stayed true to his word like that when no one would have really known otherwise if he chose not to, that to me indicated to me that this man is truly a person of integrity, of remarkable character. Over the past couple of weeks, you know that his opponents were eager to dig up an October surprise on him. And there's been all of this resurfaced footage of events that he's spoken at, protests that he's been part of, and people try to clip those things and make them go viral online as if they're a gotcha moment. Like, oh my God, you see? He is super radical. We cannot have him leading New York City. But for anyone that's real, to see that track record of his, to see that history, if anything, that all shows this man has conviction. He has a history of early moral clarity and a fearlessness of being the first person to step up and to speak up even when the rest of the world still hasn't caught up yet. And that to me is the biggest indicator that this is the kind of future that we are ready for and that we deserve. And just imagine, like, honestly, just do this little mental exercise with me. Just imagine if Zohran wasn't Muslim. Just imagine if Zohran was a white man with this level of charisma and charm and magnetism and inspiring people to step up for him and building this caliber of a national, maybe even international movement for a local race. If he would still be getting treated the way that Zohran has been treated. I think we all know the answer to that question. During his last rally with AOC and Bernie before the elections, and every single person that I spoke to said the same thing. They weren't talking about politics. They weren't talking about what party they belonged to or, anything of that sort. every single one of them spoke about belonging. Every single one of them spoke about how this experience has shown them, what's beneath the surface. It's shown them the kind of feelings and attitudes that still exist against people like them simply for the faith that they choose to follow. And it also showed them the potential of the kind of future that we can have through the leadership that Zohran has been showing us an example of. They spoke about how all of these headlines have made them feel as Americans and whether or not they belong, and how seeing someone like Zohran stand up in the face of all of that, and us having a public figure like that leading by example, what that means for so many people that have grown up under the shadow of anti-Muslim sentiment and racism and bigotry that impact so many of our communities. Seeing someone take the lead that looks like us, sounds like us, represents us, knows us, it's a new experience for a lot of people of my generation and younger that haven't seen that before. One sentiment that a young sister shared with me really stuck with me. She said that what's happening to Zohran is what's happening to all of us. Like the attacks that he's getting are attacks on all of us. And I thought that was very resonant. Here's a concept I want to introduce you to that applies to the Muslim community, but I think applies to any token minority, okay? It applies to so many of our communities, but I like to call it the Muslim paradox. And that is that when you come from a background or a certain minority group that doesn't always get represented, and you're in the public space, you're in the public eye, your actions, the way that you carry yourself, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, it's not just on your own behalf. You are representing that entire community that you come from. Should it be that way? No. Why is it that way? Because of the fact that so many of us have been excluded for so long. Because of the fact that we lack representation so disproportionately that when one of us gets in there, one of us gets in the room, it's like all of us are suddenly represented by that one person. When you're on the front lines of change, that's usually how it happens. And I say this as somebody who was previously labeled as the internet's token Muslim girl. What that says is that this truly is not about Zohran Mamdani. Zohran has become a symbol of a new America, one where so many of us that have felt left out and excluded can feel like we not only belong, but that we're celebrated. Like he said in our interview, to be celebrated for fully embodying who they are and not having to sacrifice pieces of themselves in order to fit in. That is an America that is worth fighting for. Not one where we have to force allegiance to our allies, not one where we have to mince our words and bite our tongue for fear of the secret police knocking on our door, not one where participating in a protest means having to choose between graduating with a degree or going to jail. Not in America where our taxes are being used to fight wars and bomb innocent people on the other side of the world. But in America where our voices don't have to shake every time we choose to speak up. So the Amani On Air audience, that's you guys, had a lot to say about our last interview. Oh, Bougie wants to be part of this part of the show. So let's check out some of your comments. Orbit Jupiter said, LOL on eating with our hands. Man, you have chicken, hamburgers, hot dogs, pizza, and so on. Oh my gosh, you guys. End Wokeness on X, which is a huge MAGA page on there, clipped that part of my interview with Zohran. And they really did not like Zohran saying that eating with his hands is just like eating pizza or burgers, okay? To which I responded, not unless you're racist. Al Channel 8949 says, while Mamdani is out here trying to make sure New Yorkers can actually afford a meal, folks like Cuomo are locked in existential crisis. Do I eat it with my hands? Grace it with my fork? Ah, the burdens of leadership. That's pretty much what Zohran was telling us in the last episode. It's like, we just lost SNAP benefits. The government is on shutdown. We're not paying crucial workers, you know, for their jobs. And yet we're over here debating whether or not it's acceptable for Zohran to eat with his hands. Please check to see if any of your reps engaged in this rhetoric, because you have to vote them out. Baby Khan says, I'm as big a fan of Mamdani as they come, but let's not pretend like he doesn't have connections. His parents are not nobodies. They are people of renown. Just wanted to throw this out there because I see a lot of unsavory types using this as an attack on him, justified or not. Obviously, his parents are exceptional figures. For those that don't already know, his dad is Mahmoud Mamdani, who is a prolific professor. I actually studied Mahmoud Mamdani's texts all throughout college. So this is really full circle to be supporting his son for New York City Mayor, mashallah. And his mom, Maya Nair, is also a very incredible filmmaker. When I said in the last episode that it's not like Zohran has any connections, bruh, like please. His parents are also immigrants who built their lives up, their careers brick by brick. Zohran does not come from a political legacy like Andrew Cuomo. Doesn't have establishment ties, doesn't have relationships with million and billion-dollar lobbyists to get to the place where he's at. There's no comparison. And to try to claim that Mr. and Mrs. Mamdani somehow are the plug for Zohran running for New York City mayor, it's just extremely unrealistic and factually incorrect. There's just a huge disconnect there. And that's one thing that I really tried to explain in my last video is, even for me, you don't really know how deep it goes until you're in the trenches to see, you know, what actually translates into political influence and power. El Ra 99 said, just some advice. When you're interviewing someone, stay still. Don't rock back and forth, nodding your head and saying, No, but actually, thank you, because when I was watching that interview back as well, I got nauseous watching how violently I was like nodding my head to what he was saying. And also, how has no one ever told me before to stop saying so much? I never realized that I did that conversationally, so I'll work on that. JC16 said, you can't serve two masters. Who will he serve? The people of New York or Islam? It's just so crazy because, like, when this type of loyalty is questioned for other people, isn't it called like a trope or something? But then it's somehow weaponized against Muslims in a way that's deemed acceptable. Like, we can't both have integrity in serving the people of the communities we come from and also believe in God. Newsflash. The United States of America does not have an official religion. I don't know if enough people know this. The United States of America does not have an official religion, and it does not have an official language. Why? Because we are the global melting pot. The founding fathers established that we are the global melting pot. Actually, the United States of America was established by, unfortunately, a global melting pot rather than indigenous Americans that were already here on this land. So, what master do you serve? Now, for my favorite part of the episode, Gaslight of the Week. And the honor this week goes to JD Vance. He got a shout out in our last episode, and he made it all the way up to Gaslight of the Week for this one. He has earned the title this week for this clip.
It is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, I want to live next to people who I have something in common with. I don't want to live next to 4 families of strangers.
The Vice President of the United States of America is trying to tell us that it is perfectly reasonable for us to not like our neighbors for the color of their skin or their ethnicity or their cultural background, and that Americans shouldn't feel bad about having these feelings. It's perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly acceptable. Actually, JD, it's not. That's called Jim Crow. This is MAGA stripped down to the base level. What they mean by make America great again is bring back the Jim Crow South. Make all of America the Jim Crow South. If we don't like you, we can kick you out or shoot you. And what's interesting is this came right at the heels of Cuomo also commenting on diversity, saying that the diversity in New York, the city that he ran to lead, can be a weakness. Yeah, that is definitely this week's Gaslight of the Week. Because apparently, diversity is only a weakness when it doesn't look like us. Wow. Thanks for tuning in to Amani On Air. See you next week.